Well, welcome everyone to this session on voice fraud. I'm Steve Heap from Hop Telecom. I should perhaps say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe hopefully not good night for those people who are watching. What we're going to do first of all, this session is about voice fraud, what it is, who does it impact, how does it work, and particularly what can we do about it. But before we get started with our presentations, we have 3 presentations and then a panel discussion. We just wanted to introduce ourselves so that you know who you'll be listening to in the next 90 minutes or so. So as I say, I'm Steve Heap, Hop Telecom. I hesitate to say how many years in the telecom industry. Maybe I'm the grandfather of international telecom. But for the last 10 years, I've been working as the CTO of Hop Telecom, which is a global consultancy group focused particularly on the international market and international wholesale. So that's myself. So perhaps we could move to Eric first of all, just to give a couple of minutes introduction to himself.
Thanks a lot, Steve. It's a real pleasure to be on. Thank you for inviting me to take part in today's session. Very exciting. I'm the Chief Executive of the Risk and Assurance Group. Big title, not so well paid, that role. I end up doing a lot of work and basically fighting as much as we can to get the right investment to ensure the revenue assurance team, fraud management teams, cybersecurity teams get the appreciation they deserve within telcos. Risk and Assurance Group has members all around the world, and we run events. We would have been running events all around the world. This year it's a bit more virtual, of course. I'm also well known to be a loudmouth in this industry as a result of being the editor of Comms Risk, and basically my role is to stir up as much trouble as I possibly can in the hopes that we get to sometimes see some positive results. And that's what I'll be trying to do, I think, today when I talk about the Wangiri blockchain.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Move on to Jon next.
Hi, so I'm Jon Peterson. I think I also may have a reputation as a troublemaker, now that you mention it. But I've been being a troublemaker for about 20 years now, mostly in the internet standards arena. So I did a lot of the early work on this thing called SIP, the Session Initiation Protocol, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, which included designing its security, something that I've kind of had to atone for the rest of my life. As far as I can tell, it's never ending, pretty much, having been responsible for that. And the latest manifestation of that has been my work on something that's called Stir Shaken, which I'll be talking about a bit today.
Okay, thanks, Jon. Move to Prasanna.
Hey, good day all. My name is Prasanna Kumar Pasam, currently working as Senior Manager in Product Management Group at Tata Communications, responsible for the overall fraud prevention strategy. And my overall responsibility is overseeing the overall success of fraud prevention as a service product offering. I've been working in telecom industry over 12+ years across different domains consisting of core networks, value-added services, international interconnect and roaming, and then IoT connectivity services. Thank you.
Thank you. Move to Katia next.
Yes, hi everyone. Really happy to be here to share the panel with all these great people. It sounds it's going to be interesting and with so many troublemakers, right? I'm responsible of fraud and security at BICS, a global communications enabler. We take care of, well, anything that's about international communications, roaming, SMS, voice, etc., etc. I'm here on the name of i3 Forum because I'm chairing the fraud against, the fight against fraud group. So I'm a very big believer in collaboration, and I hope we can discuss throughout this topic in the session.
Okay, Katia, and now finally to Robert.
So also welcome from my side. I'm representing Deutsche Telekom Global Carrier. I'm heading the fraud management team for international voice in this global carrier environment, and I'm trying to find the black sheep within the telecom industry and stop fraud wherever we see it. So after the troublemakers, maybe I'm the nice guy then, I don't know. So, and in a few seconds, I will give a more detailed view about what we're doing at Deutsche Telekom and how we are trying to fight fraud within our organization.
Okay, thank you, Robert. As was just mentioned, the way we're structuring today is we've got 3 10-minute or 10 to 12-minute presentations, and then we'll move into the panel discussion itself. If you have any questions that come to mind as either during the presentations or in the panel, I believe you can put the questions into the Umbrella application. We will see them, and we'll try and fit the questions into the discussion as we go. But what I'd like to do now is move to the first presentation, which is actually from Robert. So I'll hand over back to you, Robert, for that first presentation.
Okay. So as I said, I'm working for Deutsche Telekom Global Carrier, which is the international wholesale arm of Deutsche Telekom with a lot of retail business across Europe and even in the US. So the challenge was, or the question of this session is, the challenges of voice fraud and how are we going to fight against it. And I start with just a short overview. What kind of fraud types will we see in our daily business, and what are the challenges we have. So the biggest impact from a financial perspective is on the international revenue share fraud. So calling high or very expensive numbers across the world, where the traffic is normally not reaching the final destination, but charge for this traffic. The source of this traffic is mainly coming from a PBX hacking. So customer device has been hacked by the criminals, and they are generating these calls to the international expensive destinations. Another source of this traffic is roaming or artificial traffic, which is just generating volumes to these expensive destinations. Another area of this fraud we are facing is the CLI spoofing, which is becoming a bigger and bigger problem in our industry. It's used for spam traffic, for Wangiri. So Wangiri is these ping calls, missed call scenarios where people are they generate callbacks to these expensive destinations. Something new in this CLI spoofing is the source is the origin-based rating. So what we face in Europe is that we have different termination rates depending on the origin of the calls, and this is of course also very attractive to spoof or fake CLIs from the A number side to get a cheaper termination rate. So it's a kind of arbitrage model. The CLI spoofing, or the OBR, is also bringing back SIM boxing, which has been vanished from Europe for quite a while, and it's now coming back because of this. The other minor problems we see is these FAS, so fast answering settings, just extending the calls, or smart FAS, where parts of the calls have been recorded and repeated, that people just stay in a line to generate minutes. Also coming up is the SMS fraud, and the mobile operators, they definitely have issues with the handheld fraud, with stolen identities and just fake people ordering the high expensive mobile handsets. I was just thinking, so our fight against fraud, how can I describe this situation best? And I was just thinking, it's not really a race, it's just feeling like an arcade game. So we have a new fraud scenario, we're implementing technical solutions, we're trying to be up to date with everything, and but it's not really a race, it's something where we never can win, because we're always behind. So we can, and have tried to put this in a figure. We start a little bit confused. We're trying to identify it. We're trying to face it, and then we improve. We get one level up. But what we also see is it's getting more and more difficult. The next level is waiting. If we have to be faster. So it's really, really feeling like you never win, you never get there. It's always another more complex level waiting for you. So it doesn't really feel like we can win this game if we play it with the same way as we did in the past. So we have to change the way we play. So we have to play together, and maybe we have to change the rules a little bit. That's what I'm trying to show here as well, is when you just look at the elements of Tetris, we have to fit them together. It's not just one single part is providing a solution. It's a complex thing. We have to look at the strategies of the main carriers. We have to look at the development of the technologies like blockchain, AI, big data. We have to challenge the payments. We have to really cooperate closer together. We have to build trust, and we have to align. Also, regulation is a very important topic on this. I think Jon will explain a little bit more about the technical solutions of the Unshaken on this. And of course, what we should keep in mind is the customer focus. And maybe we have lost this a little bit. And then I was just thinking, so in the past, when we were talking about customer complaints, it was that people couldn't reach a number. This is not a major complaint at the moment. We get complaints that the people are reached by numbers from numbers they don't want to be reached. So it's a spam. It's a huge problem in the US, but it's coming here as well. So we have to work with these elements to improve the situation and maybe to change the game and be a winner at the end, and not just accepting the challenge, but change the game. So what are we doing from Deutsche Telekom? As I said, I'm running the voice side, the international voice side, and we have implemented some things I would like to share with you. So this is just a short overview. I hope it's not too complicated. I try to keep it simple, but what we're doing from Deutsche Telekom is our strategy is we monitor all international voice traffic. We do it fully automated 24/7, and we do it close to real time. So when we do it, we have the chance, we can, as you can see, we look at the big pipes, so all traffic at the same time to look for unusual patterns, but we also have customized focus, so we can really focus on individual traffic streams and profiles to be more detailed in the fraud detection. We look at the minutes, we look at the codes, we look at the money value, and we use a big data platform for this. Also important, what we do is, as I said, when we identify fraud, we stop the traffic for all our customers. So it's not just we block a bay number for one customer where we have detected the fraud. No, we block it really for every customer within our network. So you will not be able to reach the fraudulent B number from anywhere. What we also do is we have implemented now a feedback. So when we detect something, we inform the customer about that we've seen an anomaly or that we have blocked something. This is something which can be customized, of course, and this is at the moment free of charge. So the basic protection we offer is something we offer to all our customers. And it fits in our total strategy of Deutsche Telekom. So we have this 360-degree defense strategy where we have the voice protection, which is, I explained in a few words, and I'm happy to answer more detailed questions in the end. We have this DDoS defense, we have SSM firewall, SMS protect, we have IPVPN, secure cloud connect, and encrypted lumber. So this is just not, we're looking only at one part of the business. We're trying really to do a 360-degree approach to protect our customers. And just looking at my clock, which is running in parallel. So yeah, I sticked in the 10 minutes, and I hope I gave some insight and also some ideas about the solution. to fight fraud within the industry.
Thank you, Robert. Can you close your screen?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, just a question. You mentioned that when your fraud management system finds a fraudulent number, a fraudulent B number, that you block it not just for that customer, but for all customers or all calls going through your network at that time.
Yes.
One of the issues that I remember in the whole sort of artificial intelligence driven fraud management systems is that there are false positives from time to time. There's nothing in this world that's perfect. Do you then sometimes block numbers as a result of a false positive, and do you get complaints that people can no longer reach?
Okay, so we have implemented a quite advanced system. So in a way, we have, when we're trying to, so sometimes it's not enough just to block a B number. Sometimes you have to block the source of the traffic. And we can be very granular by blocking only a single destination, only or country. And this is happening on a temporary base. So normally it's something we can configure. So everything we do on a customer level, it's configurable and it's on a temporary base. On a B number side, we have a lot of experience, and of course, there's sometimes you block a number which shouldn't be blocked, but there's a standard process to unblock this, which is also quite easy. And I have to say, I'm just looking at the figures, we're 99.9% we're accurate. So, and most of the customers understand if they can't reach a number and they maybe have to open a trouble ticket. But on the other side, we get a lot of positive feedback about the proactive way we're dealing with this. So 100% is impossible.
Yes.
But I have to say we're quite happy with this. And also the granularity we have built in our routing system is reducing this significantly.
Okay, thank you. I think
Thank you for the question.
Quite a number of interesting points came up that we can pick up in the panel discussion. There's a couple of things that I wrote down as we were going through it. But let's stop that presentation and move on to the second presentation, which is now from Eric and is on Wangiri and blockchain, I believe.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, well, no slides from me. I'm going to just talk. I've been spending the last year talking about the Wangiri blockchain, so I feel like I've got enough practice to be able to do this in 10 minutes. Over 60 telcos have joined the Wangiri blockchain consortium since we moved from the pilot phase, which began last year, and launched the production version of the Wangiri blockchain in March of this year. That includes some big names: Vodafone Group, iBasis, Ooredoo Group, Reliance Jio, the world's third largest mobile operator by subscriber numbers. But that doesn't really convey how our approach is designed to work for any telco, a term which I use to cover all kinds of communications providers, wholesale carriers, international groups, national retail operators, and quite a number of firms that are difficult to categorize as the world changes around us. We wanted to institute a near real-time fraud intelligence exchange that would work for any kind of telco, any size of telco. And that means that I'm also very proud of all the small telcos that have been joining us. In fact, the very first telco that joined the Wangiri blockchain was Go, an operator in Malta. And it shows that the system works for any kind of telco. Our principle is straightforward. More data is better than less data. So if we know that somebody has used a phone number as part of a Wangiri attack, whether that's on the far side of the planet or perhaps it's suffered by a competitor right next to us in our own country, having that knowledge means that we're in a better position to analyze and identify when we're suffering attacks in our own telcos. Also, there's no harm in finding out perhaps one of the numbers in your range is being used by a Wangiri attack without your knowledge. So in the long run, our game plan is very simple. You're going to get immediate information, near to real-time information from other telcos about the Wangiri attacks taking place, which will help you to improve your algorithms, improve your decision process for how you deal with the attacks that you suffer. But in the long run, we build up a comprehensive view of all the Wangiri traffic that is occurring worldwide. That'll allow us to shift from defense to attack, pinpointing the bad actors who are to blame for Wangiri. The blockchain is simple, it's effective, the costs are negligible, the potential long-term gains are enormous. So why not join the Wangiri blockchain is the question we've been putting to many telcos. And thankfully, I'm very glad to say a lot of them are saying, yeah, why not? We'll join it, which is great to hear. Now, if I'm honest with you, of course, not everybody immediately rushes to join the Wangiri blockchain. People have questions, people have things that are in the back of their mind, doubts. What could go wrong, perhaps? Why shouldn't we join? So 3 questions come up basically when I find out when I'm talking to telcos about the Wangiri blockchain. The first one of which is convenience. How easy is it to connect and use this blockchain? That's a really simple one, and it gets answered very quickly when people do try to use it because it's very quick, it's very easy. People sign up for an account online at our web portal. If they represent a reputable business, they'll be given access. Then they can use the web portal to execute uploads of data, type in numbers by hand if they want, upload files if they want, and they get to download the data through the web portal as and when they like. And that's how a lot of people share intelligence using the blockchain. But if you want something more automated, you can use the API to the Wangiri blockchain to connect directly to your systems that you have in place. So there are many leading vendors of anti-fraud solutions who've already integrated their products with the Wangiri blockchain. So we've got real telcos out there who've connected to the blockchain via fraud management systems supplied by major vendors like Subex and Euro Technologies. There's others who connect the Wangiri blockchain to different kinds of anti-fraud systems, kind of the kinds of systems that do automatic blocking rather than data analysis. And so firms like GBSD Technologies, Later Systems, there's a bunch of vendors out there who are already augmenting their products by using the data that's being exchanged between telcos. If you're not sure which vendor has connected their products with our API, then by all means give us a ring here at RAG. I'll be glad to answer your question, or just ask your vendor to do it. The reason why so many vendors have already connected is because it's quick and easy to connect to the API. So they don't really have that many reasons not to do it if the customers ask them to do it. That also means that actually telcos also connect their own in-house developed systems to the API themselves. So telcos like Vivacom, for example, have done their own work in integrating, and basically the story is always the same. It's quick, it's straightforward, and then you've got a new source of data for analyzing fraud. That's the first question, ease. The second question that comes up is, how much does it cost? And here's why I start to feel like a used car salesman. You can't believe the great value that we're giving away here at RAG. Basically, it's free for the majority of users. Success of an initiative like this depends on getting the maximum amount of data flown backwards and forwards between telcos. So the way to maximize the flow of data is to give free access to every party that uploads data up to the blockchain. Effectively, you're paying for access by giving your data. Now, we know that some will only want to download data. So to prevent excessive free riding, in future, we will introduce charges for those consortium members that choose to take data, but not input any data into the system. And we will work on the process that seems to be that there's going to be some extent to which the community has got to be involved in a conversation which says how much is the right amount of data that's fair for every telco. You wouldn't expect Go to put in as much data as Reliance Jio, for example. So what's fair is going to be different in different cases, but the principle is straightforward. Right now, though, the priority is building up the interest and the trust. So that means basically right now, everybody gets to try the blockchain for free. Finally, and perhaps the question that is the biggest sticking point that comes up in conversation is people ask about the quality of the data when they access the Wangiri blockchain. Well, first and foremost, only reputable businesses are allowed to join the consortium, and we do implement basic formatting checks on the data being uploaded to ensure they correspond to valid number ranges, for example. But of course, there's always the possibility that somebody may upload data which is not considered to be of high enough quality compared to the expectations that other telcos have. We recognize that. We don't think that there's a straightforward, easy, one-size-fits-all solution to that problem. Again, let's emphasize more data is better than less data. So rather than trying to impose some point of view where we're an authority, where somebody's in place deciding to bar or to cleanse data, what's going to be visible, what's not going to be visible, our focus is on scoring the data, using the community to give feedback as to the quality of data, and therefore grading the quality of the data depending upon how well other people have found it's been useful in practice. Basically, using the wisdom of the crowd to judge the reliability of the data that's within the blockchain. Now, again, this is something that's in evolution. We don't have all the answers to this yet, but we're putting in place scoring mechanisms that will be driven by multiple factors. One of those factors will be, for example, whether the same data is coming from several independent sources, which of course makes it more likely it's reliable. Another one will be that users who've used the data will provide feedback, and perhaps they'll provide feedback to say that they didn't think it was good data, in which case we will create flags around that data to help people to identify where questions have been raised about its quality. And as we work over time, we intend to work towards a kind of reputation model, whereby if a source has been providing high quality data that's got good feedback, another source, lower quality data, not such good feedback, then the reputation of the source will also be provided to all the users of the data so they can decide for themselves which data they seek to act upon and what they intend to do in response to that data. So basically, we're not going to be the decision makers. We're a conduit for telcos to work together and genuinely run a community that makes the best value out of all the data that's available. And I think that's the way forward, because I've been doing data analysis for 25 years, and you can't improve the quality of data if you don't first get some data. And the challenges we've had here, I think within the industry, we're dealing with issues like Wangiri, and Wangiri is a great example of an issue we can deal with, because in the end, there is always a phone number that is the number that they're trying to trick the poor consumer into calling back. The issue you have is we don't first get the data together, we don't get the maximum number of participants showing the data, it then becomes very difficult to improve and refine the quality of data. So that's what we're working towards, a giant data repository which everybody can contribute to. I like to think of this as the Wikipedia model versus the Encyclopedia Britannica model of how to do these things. So I understand entirely when people intuitively ask, shouldn't we have an authority to edit the information? Shouldn't we have people who are in the know controlling this? I don't know who's in the know to control this. I'd rather have everybody have an opportunity to provide feedback on the data, and as I say, rely upon the wisdom of the crowd. It leads to a situation where basically the resource is also far more economical than having to pay for an authority who then makes all the decisions for us. And I think that's the reason why we're seeing so many vendors wanting to harness this data and augment their own algorithms as a result. So to summarize, this is not a theoretical exercise, and RAG is a non-profit association, so this is not about profit. This is just about crazy people like me getting fed up with problems like Wangiri, saying, is there a quick and effective solution? And a fantastic group of telcos and vendors coming together saying, why not just do this? It really isn't that expensive to do. It really doesn't take that much burden. I'm not going to pretend that it's 100% effective, but we do know that we need to accumulate data to understand not just where we are with fraud, but where fraud is going. So my point about Wangiri would be, Wangiri is a Japanese word. The fraud comes from Japanese sex lines trying to trick Japanese consumers into calling them back. Now, that's not what we would call the typical Wangiri today. What we could think of as the typical Wangiri is international in nature, for example. So these frauds evolve, and we're already seeing that as people put in place perhaps very intelligent, artificial intelligent filters to try to identify Wangiri, all that happens is the fraudsters will evolve their approach. They will mutate and apply different techniques that therefore won't get so easily picked up, that would then perhaps evade the controls put in place. And a great example of that is we're hearing that much of Wangiri is now moving towards attacking businesses that have call centers where they offer their customers a dial back option if they can't get through to a customer service representative straight away. So having the data in one place, it allows us to monitor and track the change of these things over time. So that's it. It's the Wangiri blockchain. It's cheap, it works, it can be adopted rapidly, and the more it's adopted, the more effective it will be. So I'm basically asking everybody who's watching this session now, if you're the vendor of an anti-fraud product, follow the example of your competitors by integrating your product with the Wangiri blockchain. And if you're a telco, please go on the web, get an account, download the data. Don't just take my word for it. Take a look at what's already in there from the other telcos. And if you're liking what you're seeing, I think you will, share the instances of Wangiri fraud that you've detected with everybody else. We've made the exchange of fraud intelligence as easy and as rapid as it's going to get. So it's up to you, audience. I hope you've taken on board this message. I've tried to keep it to 10 minutes. Hopefully I've run to time. If you want to find out more information, wangiriblockchain.riskandassuranceGroup.org is the URL, or just Google Wangiri blockchain. You'll find us soon enough. And there, end of my crazy sales pitch, Steve. Was that okay with you?
Okay, thanks, Eric. I mean, intriguing. It sounds a little bit like Amazon reviews, doesn't it? That, you know, where people are reviewing the quality of the information, just as long as the fraudsters don't get on to sort of downgrade their competitors.
Yeah, or TripAdvisor.
Against that.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And you're quite right. We have to have reputation built into this. This is not a blockchain where literally anybody is going to go on board. We're going to verify the identity of the individuals, the users from each company, to verify that they're in the relevant role within their company. But let's be frank, it's not going to be that difficult to identify who are genuine people like Robert Teichmueller there, for example, whether he should be allowed onto it. It's going to be easy to include him onto it. But over time as well, we will put in place this grading system so that if there was any doubts, any suspicions about people polluting the data stream, we should be able to rip that out quite quickly as well, I'd hope, with the help of big telcos who know about these things.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure when we get into the panel discussion properly, it'd be interesting to get views from the others, but let's keep to our schedule and move on to the third presentation. We're now going to get stirred and shaken up by, I'm sure you've heard that joke many times, by Jon. So I'll pass over to Jon.
Great, and thank you. And can everyone see this in normal presenter looking mode? Okay, fantastic. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about Stir Shaken. I'm going to try to do so through the lens of its fraud impact in particular. As I alluded to earlier, I do a lot of work with international standards around this, largely through the Internet Engineering Task Force. And this is kind of my mandate at Neustar. I'm a fellow at Neustar. People often ask me what that means to be a fellow at a company like this. It really is the troublemaking role. My job is to go out and try to disrupt the industry, take us to interesting new directions and businesses. And there's nothing quite like, oh, I should probably get this. Good. There's nothing quite like Stir Shaken coming around to disrupt companies that are, say, in the business of delivering color name, which is one of the things that we do at Neustar. You know, we're responsible for a lot of the landline transactions whereby people ask, okay, for this given calling telephone number, what's the name that should be displayed for that? We run databases related to that. And obviously, one of the things you run into real quickly if you're in that line of work is the reality that there's a lot of color line identification spoofing out there, a lot of caller ID spoofing. And really, Stir Shaken exists as a framework in order to be able to cryptographically sign and verify information about telephone calls specifically to beat this. Now, just to get into the first principles of it a bit, we say Stir Shaken, there are kind of two separate things. Stir is a technology that was designed in the Internet Engineering Task Force that defines these roles for an entity that's going to do signing in an originating network. We call it an authentication service. And an entity that's going to do validation, which is usually in the terminating network. It can also be done actually by various intermediate carriers if they so desire. But, you know, effectively, the signature that is generated by Stir is supposed to protect things like the called party number, the calling party number, and the time that this call is taking place. All that is bundled into this object format we call a passport. Basically, it's like a CDR. It just gets signed and then kind of bundled with the call as the call is sent out and traverses various networks to get to its destination. Now, when we talk about STIR in concert with Shaken, Shaken is a profile of STIR that was developed in North America that's pretty specific to the way that North American carriers operate. This is seen a lot of traction, as we'll discuss in both the United States and in Canada. But basically, it provides a governance framework for determining who gets to sign passports. And the conventional wisdom about this in the United States is that these tokens that are issued by basically a regulated entity in the United States enable carriers, people that already have operating carrier numbers, which is a particular kind of network identifier you get in the US. These carriers can get certificates by virtue of having these operating carrier numbers. And that governance framework has direct ties to the regulator, to the FCC in the United States, to the CRTC in Canada. And as a consequence of this, this does provide, the opportunity for there to be things like the Trace Act, which was passed at the end of last year in the United States, already been alluded to here, that creates a deadline, in particular a June 2021 deadline for the implementation of STIR Shaken in the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the implications of that are, especially for international kind of wholesale traffic coming into the United States as we go forward, and what the fraud angles are potentially around that. But, like I said, originally STIR Shaken was created in order to detect caller number spoofing. That was pretty much what the initial problem statement identified as the main issue behind it. This is because, of course, in the United States, the #1 complaint to the FCC and the FTC every year for several years running has been spam calls. Spam calls are just, it's a plague in the United States. If you don't live here, if you don't have a +1 number, you can't imagine how bad it is. You get multiple of these a day, every day. There are days when I get 10, 15. This is just something that's constantly happening. And as a consequence of that, there's tremendous regulatory and political pressure in the United States to resolve this problem. And as a consequence of that, really the FCC approached the Internet Engineering Task Force and asked us to look at this problem space in particular. And we identified really 3 kind of related threats, illegal robocalling being the primary one. Swatting is another, if you're not familiar with this. This is a sort of attack where you spoof to emergency services. If there's like an active shooter or something at someone's house in order to try to get like police to show up there. And there have been several high-profile incidents of this in the United States that are pretty scary. Voicemail hacking, kind of like the news of the world style attacks, is another one where by spoofing a number, I try to compromise a voicemail system that is simply key to give you access to the voicemail box, provided that you have the right calling party number. But it's pretty clear that when you have these things in place, if you had a system in place that required all carriers to sign calls, that you had the strong assurance that the carriers that should be signing for a particular calling party number were signing for it, that's going to have implications for fraud. That once this is in prime time after June 2021, there are going to be a number of respects in which this technology will be used in concert with fraud indicators. Nobody believes it's going to solve fraud, right? Merely being able to detect that calling number spoofing is going on is not a silver bullet that's going to stop any of these things. What it is something that could work in concert. For example, with the Wangiri blockchain, perfect example, right? Of things that this would be a cocktail mixed in with that. I think of it really as more of a foundational building block that helps us to get where we need to go. So real quick, I'm just gonna go through what this actually looks like. As I said, there's something called an authentication service that lives in the originating network. This is pretty much specific to SIP when we talk about STIR Shaken. Shaken is very specific to something in the United States we call the IPNNI, the IP network-to-network interface, which is defined by ADIS in the United States. Which assumes that carriers basically use SIP end-to-end. But this passport gets bundled with a call as it goes through the service provider A network at the authentication service, passes through an interconnection point, makes it to service provider B. One wrinkle of this, I think I should probably mention, we don't have a ton of time I know to talk today, but signed calls have an attestation level in Shaken that is either A, B, or C. A is something really where the originating carrier in signing it at that authentication service is saying, this is my customer, this is my number, I know who this person is. B is a little more in direction, like maybe I gave that to an MVNO or like a reseller, that block of numbers. I'm not exactly sure who the customer is on the other side of that. And then C is like, hey, I got this from like a gateway. I have absolutely no idea, like, you know, who originally tested this number, or this is just something that has passed through the transitive trust of the SS7 network to me, for example. But basically, these things all, when they reach the verification service, end up being inputs to analytics. And the analytics, the AIs, the ML, all that stuff kicks in and determines what actually gets rendered to the user. One little wrinkle of this that is probably relevant to a lot of the people watching today is that there's kind of two modes STIR can work in. I referred to the passport being bundled with a SIP invite. Well, in cases where there is PSTN lags in the middle between the originating and destination network, or for whatever reason, you know, end-to-end SIP cannot be traversed, we also have something called out-of-band STIR, which allows you to store these passports. It's something called a call placement service, which exists as a repository to make sure that there's kind of a fallback. Really, the way you typically do this is you know, if you're SIP compliant, right, you send out your invite with the passport contained in it, but at the same time, you also store the passport in the CPS, just in case the terminating network can actually get access to it that way. And you see a lot of the fraud cases actually in the wireless space look a lot more like you would want something like out of band than in band. In other words, environments where intermediary, you know, carriers may be, you know, performing in ways that the origin and destination networks did not anticipate or do not appreciate, and, you know, out-of-band solutions may end up being material to some of those use cases. A few other things I mentioned about it. This is something that, although it's ready for prime time in the sense of the basic functionality of signing, yes, this carrier says that this call came from this number, and this carrier is supposed to be able to say that. That basic functionality works. There's a ton of additional, you know, development that's still being done on this as a standard. One component of this is connected identity, making sure it works properly in the reverse direction, so that you actually see who is generating the signaling, you know, on the terminating side, and whether that should be the entity that's generating it. And things like short stopping, for example, this is very relevant to attacks like that. We're doing a ton of work on enterprise integration or non-carrier integration for OTT providers, communication providers of service sorts of players who don't, in the strict North American sense, have OCNs that don't, you know, wouldn't ordinarily qualify as regulated carrier entities, but still feel like they should be first-class citizens in STIR/SHAKEN. There's a lot of work we're doing towards that will have, I think, interesting implications, especially for international traffic. And finally, there's a ton of work on doing things beyond just caller name and caller number, branded call display, rich call data, be able to render logos, geographical data, things like that. So, you know, the parts that are necessary to block the simple illegal robocalling problem, that's the huge tactical problem we have in America, those are baked enough that, you know, this was already designed years ago, and the June 2020 mandate for those is pretty achievable. But again, once this infrastructure is in place, it will be used foundationally to do a bunch of other really cool things. Definitely the international mobile space is a very interesting one for STIR/SHAKEN. As I said, some of the way that those attacks work, the threats in that environment work, from a fraud perspective, I can imagine out-of-band STIR getting more use. I can imagine there being extensions to the passports that are specific to mobile operator requirements. This is something we've discussed a bit in like the GSMA Vines group. Certainly there's a greater emphasis on messaging. Nuisance messaging is a growing problem in America. It is not nearly as large a problem as nuisance calls are. But certainly nuisance messaging is on the rise. As a consequence of that, that is something where I think we're gonna see more work done. And definitely there are potentially alternative governance models to issuing credentials to the SHAKEN model that you might explore, where environments you don't have OCNs. You don't have an OCN as an MCC, MNC, for example, a good thing to use for STIR/SHAKEN. I think really, you know, the one takeaway I guess I would give to the people listening here today, you know, is that we look at this in North America, in the United States and Canada, as kind of defending +1. In other words, preventing people from spoofing calls from +1 numbers. That's that's what each nation state who kind of, from a regulatory perspective, enters into the stir-shaken ecosystem is doing. They're defending, their own numbering resource. And given, that we're going to expect calls from +1 numbers to be signed when they show up, some of these international cases, for example, where there are call centers that are originating calls from +1, from outside the geographic North American area, those, when they hit international gateways, may get the C attestation at best. And let's be honest, a lot of carriers in the United States are saying they might not even bother to alert users if they're getting calls from a C attestation. And so this is probably the most immediate impact of this that people here in this forum should be mindful of. That may even affect some mobile roaming cases, depending on what 3GPP decides to do around this. And I think that still is a very open question, what they are going to do around it. For those, we do have solutions for this. For example, for the call center in India that wants to originate +1 numbers, we have ways in stir-shaken to delegate a certificate to that entity so that they could sign and it would look like a legitimate, stir-shaken signed call coming out of there. But in that case, the transit and inter-exchange carriers would need to be able to carry those passports end to end. And those invites need to be able to get from those call centers to the North American edge gateways unimpeded. Because if they don't, we're going to end up going to out-of-band solutions for this. And those out-of-band solutions are going to end up potentially being disintermediating, frankly, for people that are in the middle of these calls. And I think that's my takeaway. I hope I haven't gone too far over here.
Sorry, I was just struggling to unmute myself. Thank you, John. What we're now going to do is to move into the panel part of the discussion. And I think we might as well start with the issue that John brought up. And perhaps I'll ask Katia, first of all, to sort of think about this. This whole issue that John just mentioned about this being implemented in the US in the middle of next year, and roaming calls, particularly of US customers roaming into Europe, could well be impacted on it. Do you think it's something that the international carriers are thinking about, ready to do something about, or are we heading for, a big precipice and things will start to break in a year's time?
Well, everybody has heard about stir-shaken by now. It's a big buzz. Somehow, maybe not everybody understands all the details of it, but we certainly talk about it in every single fraud discussion that we have globally. Stir-shaken comes into picture in one way or the other. Now, why it's so important? Well, because at some point it addresses one big issue, that is the certification on the CLI, to make sure to bring some kind of clarity to the end user, whether a CLI they see in their phone when receiving a call is secure or not. And we have mentioned a couple of times here by different people that the CLI spoofing is a big issue. It comes into a picture for Wangiri attacks, robocall, and all the different implications that John was mentioning. Also in Europe with the origin-based pricing that we have, but also in other regions. In Africa, we're going also into that direction. Probably not immediately, but in the midterm, probably we'll get there in Latin America, Middle East. It's a global trend to move into schemes of pricing for carriers and eventually end users that relate to, that imply a checkup on the CLI. So it becomes critical to have some kind of reliability on this CLI. And STIR is, and Shaken together with it is, I would say, the first technical means that can provide some kind of reliability on the CLI. which is something we just didn't have until now. So it's extremely important. The problem that we see in the international space is that stir shaking has not necessarily been made thinking of the international interaction between the different telco players. And we see that also, so it's been implemented in the States. It seems to be providing good results. We'll see probably next year when it will be fully implemented by most of the parties. But and we are already now starting to hear other regulators than FCC and CRT talking about this as a good solution. The problem and the big complexity comes with this international framework that we have in Europe. I mean, we're a very small region, but with a lot of countries, a lot of regulatory authorities to get to agree together. I mean, if we extend it to other regions, even worse. So we need to find a solution, probably all together, and then that's where all these discussions that we are having at the I3 Forum, GSMA, Vines, and in other groups come into the picture and show all the importance, because personally, I do not think that we will have, I don't know how many regulators in Europe plus regulators in Africa and Middle East and Asia, and there you go. I mean, I don't think we're going to have any kind of agreement or in the mid, even long term. I think I'll be retired when it happens. But I think we as an industry can probably use the foundation that Jon was talking about STIR, to build something that can work internationally. Maybe not through regulatory pressure, because again, I don't think that will happen in a reasonable time frame for me to see it. But at least we can use that probably to solve part of the issue. And again, as Eric also mentioned it, and Jon, so this is a piece in the puzzle. It's not, there will not be one solution that will solve all issues, but you know, I mean, in the end, the puzzle can be quite full. So it's one piece and the other and the other.
Okay, thank you, Katia. Does anyone else want to add to that, or do you want to move to the next question on my list?
I mean, certainly I'd be happy to speak to it a little bit. I mean, yeah, I agree. I you know, when I was alluding to how Shaken was designed, you know, with the North American kind of carrier operating environment, you know, clearly as the target for that design, moving it out of that context into, for example, the international mobile network context, you just have to discard those assumptions and adopt alternate ones. And yes, I think the work we've been doing with I3F, with Vines, and the GSMA, I mean, this could end up being the seed for a way of looking at this that wouldn't necessarily require such a heavyweight top-down regulated approach to getting a good number of the actual telephones on the planet to have this assurance. And like, if we can get there through that, you know, if the recommendations that are generated by those groups, you know, can carry enough force, you know, I think it needs to carry force both with operators and to some degree with regulators. I think you can't, because this is such a hot button issue for consumers, you can't entirely discount regulators from the equation. But definitely, I think a solid recommendation of a practice that could get this accelerated, that did not require, you know, an ITU-like international treaty process to be navigated in order for it to work, like that would be great. Yes.
Just one comment from my side. What we're talking about is now very special technical solutions, which coming from the pressure of the regulation and more or less indirectly from the customer. So we're not solving the problem. We're fighting with the Wangiri blockchain, with the steer and shake. We're fighting some parts of it, but we're not really coming to the source of the problem. We have to change our strategy, and we have as Katia mentioned, we have to work together. If we wait that every regulator in the world is coming up with a requirement, it's a huge investment. And we know the voice margins are not very high. So this is definitely something which will have an impact on the future of telecom. So we shouldn't wait.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Just changing gears, I know amongst the panel here that Deutsche Telekom, Tata and BICS have all invested heavily in their fraud management systems. They're actively blocking calls when they detect a fraud, and blocking calls to an international carrier means blocking revenue. And as Robert just said, it's sort of a low margin business. So when you take action on behalf of blocking calls that are impacting a customer, you are definitely reducing your revenue. So what do the customers actually think about that? Do the customers recognize what you're doing? Do they take your fraud efforts into account when they're choosing where to route traffic? Or do they just say, oh yeah, okay, but we like that cheaper minute over there. That's what, where we're going to send our traffic. So perhaps Prasanna, you could start the discussion on that topic. Do the customers know, and do they care?
Yeah, sure, Steve. I think it is very critical for us to communicate the value to our customers. So for some of the customers, it might be very easy for them to realize the benefits, while for some, it will be very difficult to make them realize, because, the way the customers, the kind of customer segments that we serve today are completely different from one another. So for this particular aspect, to make the customers realize the benefit because of the various fraud prevention capabilities that we are bringing to the table, I think we make use of vast amount of data that is getting generated on our network in the form of CDRs and logs to derive the tangible benefits, such as potential savings due to proactive traffic blocking towards a non-fraudulent number or high-risk number ranges. So to our surprise, recently, I think we have seen a sudden surge in call attempts towards the numbers that have history of fraud. So to my surprise, I think, when I was running the reports, regarding the number of calls that we block on our network, in the month of July alone, we were able to block 47 million calls that are getting from customers around the globe towards the non-fraudulent numbers or high-risk numbers. So it is very important, for us to be able to make the customer understand, in the form of data, whatever we see on our network, and we can able to make, we can run, we can make use of this particular data for the benefit of customer to profile their potential fraud-prone callers and the destinations which are being targeted by the fraudsters or hackers, so that customers can take informed decisions to be able to establish the proper controls in order to minimize the financial exposure of their businesses due to potential compromise of either our direct customer or customers end users. So irregardless in the entire ecosystem, whoever is maybe getting compromised, but still our primary objective is to be able to minimize the financial exposure of our customers that we serve. So I think it is very crucial for each and every business to make them realize, the kind of benefit that these fraud prevention capabilities bring to their businesses is very important.
Okay, I'm sure Katia and Robert have a view on whether customers care about what you're doing.
Yes, definitely. So we asked our customers, we did a customer survey and asked how important is security for them. And 95% came back and said it's very important for us. So that's what I explained in the beginning, is this 360-degree defense strategy we're running is something where we listen to our customers. And I hope it makes a difference. And that's why we have the clear strategy. And of course, Deutsche Telekom has also a huge retail customer base. So when you look at the segments for retail business, it's important that you provide secure connection. And this is also in both ways. We protect our customers from spam calls, from Wangiri calls automatically, but we also protect them for outgoing calls to have any damage there. And what I said, and I strongly believe, I'm really passionate about, is we as an industry, we have to change. We have to listen to our customers. It's not just a short-term revenue game. I don't believe in this. So it's really something where we have to approach in a different way, because regulation coming as the speaker of the customers normally and asking for solutions. So that's why I think it's important. That's why we have reacted. And also we are able to provide input and feedback to our customers automatically. And I encourage everybody to test us and see if it makes a difference. We believe it makes a difference.
If I may add, so I think it all revolves again about all of us acting as an industry. So there is no such a thing as one operator or one carrier that is an isolated igloo in in the far distance. So we are all part of the same ecosystem. And what happens is that most tier ones carriers have invested a lot in technology, in different platforms to solve fraud issues on voice, on SMS, on roaming. So I think all the big players have a strategy, and we see it because most of the big tier ones are part of the IT reform, are constantly participating actively in these meetings, and we see there's an evolution. When we started discussing about all these, I don't know, it was 8 years ago or 10 years ago. It was something new. Now I think it's understood by all parties that we are part of the ecosystem, part of the solution also of that problem. And I think there's no customer, no operator out there that still believes that wholesale carriers do not have a role to play in fighting fraud or increasing and improving security. So they do appreciate it, but I would say that in most cases, they understand it's almost a must. We need to propose this if we want to keep the customer satisfied. And as Robert was mentioning, listening to the customer is key. I mean, nowadays, if you don't listen to a customer, you lose the customer. It's as simple as that. But if we come back to your question on are they still interested in just paying the cheaper price, it depends. It depends. There are operators where end customer subscriber satisfaction or it's less of a priority, and I think that there's a regional difference also in that respect. So not all regions, not all countries, and then not all operators have the same focus. And we also need to be conscious of the fact that, well, we have been saying this is a decreasing margin business. So for some operators, it may be complicated to necessarily always pay the best quality. So I think there's a shift. At some point, we'll get to the point where fraud and security will be a necessary item, must-have, and I think that we will switch at that point. That will be an inflection point, because then if all parties really engage and build strategies, because investment means to have strategic push top-down at some point from the companies, then I think we can get to really an inflection point where we really start seeing a difference.
Yes, I just would like to add one comment. So one thing is, I would like to use the picture of that we're playing the same game, we play with different rules, but I believe security will be a differentiator. And what we have to do is we have to align and play with the same rules.
Okay. I can remember discussions in the past, and it sounds as though we've moved on from this point, but the discussion in the past was always, well, yes, someone with a good fraud management system could identify problem calls going to a premium rate number somewhere, and they could block those calls. But what would happen earlier in the network is that the calls would overflow to the next carrier, and the next carrier in the route maybe not take such a, an approach and end up carrying the revenue or getting the revenue, and the end customer still gets defrauded. Do you think that still is part of the mentality, or have things moved on over the past 5 years or so, and that's less of a worry?
Unfortunately not.
How we do it, I mean, whenever we propose our customers to to protect them against fraud, and that we block numbers because they are fraudulent and that they have been verified and tested, we make sure that they get the right information, release codes, etc., so that they do not pass it on to another supplier, because then, I mean, we're not helping much. If if you just block it on your network but just push it to somebody else, there's not much of a benefit eventually for the operator or the end user. So again, that's I mean, the solutions, and I think most of us propose stuff like this, need to be complete and coherent. So it's not just blocking fraud on our own network, it's blocking fraud, I mean, to get rid of it completely.
Yeah. That fits in nicely into the presentation that Eric gave. I know you talked about Wangiri, but really these numbers are not necessarily just generated as a result of a Wangiri problem. It could be a breaking into a PBX. Do the international carriers feed numbers that they find into your system and take numbers out and use those to drive their own fraud management systems?
Absolutely, yes. So we've got a number of international carriers. I mentioned iBasis there, Deutsche Telekom. I'm not always good with remembering all the names of the businesses, and we're talking to some of the world's biggest carriers right now about getting them on board as well. So this is something that works at all levels, and I think it increases its power if you get it to work at all levels, because if every party who is involved in the handling of a call is working collectively through a system like this, they're also monitoring each other. They're also monitoring each other's intelligence. You're also finding out how good you are at spotting Wangiri compared to the other people that you work with. Perhaps your algorithms aren't as good as some of the people you're working with. So this is a very open system, and I think it's great that we have a way of exchanging the data. Just to come back to something else that we've also been talking about here, I don't think we've got it worked out yet as an industry, but I hope that this might be a step towards the idea of automating the concept of reputation, because a lot of the great work done by people like Robert and Katia is done in meetings which are held previously face-to-face, much more now like this on Zoom, but where people in privileged positions talk to other people in privileged positions about what they know is really going on in the world, and therefore their suspicions, their doubts about bad actors within the ecosystem. The difficulty with that is that that's not an easy thing to scale up. You can only in the end have so many people involved in that conversation before people rightly start to have doubts about, are you starting to include some of the bad actors in the conversation and therefore defeating the purpose of the conversation? I would hope that we need to start looking with perhaps the intelligence that we gain as a result of, for example, through something like Stir Shaken, and you can start to analyze and identify when traffic is coming in that you are not giving the accreditation to. You might start to take, and I think probably John knows more about this than I do, more of this internet-driven view where you start to understand which are the good companies and which are the bad companies, where it is more easy to objectify the point of view by saying the data is showing a pattern here. you're not necessarily pointing a finger, you're not necessarily blaming people, but there's never a tendency that some are acting better and some are not acting so well. So John, do you want to chip in here?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, so I think there is a respect in which one of the main benefits of STIR/SHAKEN, you know, which is something that we should have gotten free from SIP as we started to migrate from SS7 and just kind of didn't for a variety of reasons, is this notion of non-repudiation of the source of this traffic. I mean, the SS7 network is an ocean of transitive trust and has been for all time to come. I mean, international gateway boundaries, you know, kind of simplify the traffic in ways that, you know, enforce different trust policies as when things cross those kinds of edges. But, you know, within the seas, we'll say, of SS7, it's always just been transitive trust. And yes, the fact that you have someone on the hook saying, I vouched for this call and I'm the carrier that did, and like you can prove that forensically 6 weeks later if you need to, that is an incredibly useful property of STIR/SHAKEN. And it's the way that I think, you know, SHAKEN is envisioned to deal with a lot of the rogue actors. We say in America, we use the term pink carriers. I don't know if that's used outside, but because there are entities who are actors that have access to the SS7 network who are originating these illegal robocalls today. And like identifying who those people are is a big part of this exercise. And how exactly that gets scaled up to an international context, you know, is going to be a challenge. I think as Katia was alluding to earlier, but I definitely agree with you that, you know, having this foundational technology is what I think is a key enabler for reputation services. Today, there are a ton of kind of tactical robocalling prevention solutions in the United States that are based on called party number, right? That's like, okay, a bunch of people crowdsourced reported that this called party number is bad. Well, if it's trivial to spoof called party numbers, like how valuable is that solution? Because any sophisticated actor can, you know, change the called party number of their robocalls with every call. And they do neighbor spoofing, they do targeted, I want it to look like this is someone that's in your area code and your service area, you know, to make it more likely that you'll pick up the phone. These are extremely targeted attacks that, you know, are relying on that, just the ability to arbitrarily set the calling party number in the network today. Once you actually lock that down and require people to sign for these things and know who originated them, have some assurance those numbers are real, then reputation systems can kick in. Then crowdsourced reputation systems saying, this was a bad calling number, work, if you actually know that that calling number was not spoofed. And so I totally agree with you. As a foundational technology, STIR/SHAKEN will, I think, make that kind of reputation system a lot more tractable.
But I think it goes even beyond the numbers themselves, because at some point, because as you say, these CLIs can be so very easily spoofed. So I think at some point we need to be able, and then I do not know if we need more regulation or deregulation to be able to share, because at the end of the day, we all know, and I'm rather talking about Tata and Deutsche Telekom and the other carriers, we know who some of these bad guys are. We just cannot communicate on that. And as Eric was saying, when we meet in our discussions at i3 Forum, for example, we need to be extremely careful on how we share information, what kind of information we share, the form we give to it. And eventually we found ourselves with a very narrow band for communicating and what we can communicate, while on the internet, everybody can talk very freely about so very many things. You buy anything, you can criticize the shop you bought on, or the sender, or whatever. But on our business, we cannot do that. And it would, I believe that could really be a game changer if we were more free to bypass some of the obligations we have due to historical NDAs, due to all these kind of constraints that we have built over time. I know some people may be opening big eyes, but I really think all these constraints are rather somehow facilitating the life of some fraudsters. So
I agree. What
yeah.
we need is transparency, but what we also need is a strategy change. So what we're discussing here is the symptoms and the small technical solutions. But I think everybody, if we aligned with the big carriers, are really serious about the different strategy, removing the business from their network will have an impact. That's what I believe.
Do you think the regulators are going to apply more pressure to us? I know there was something in Ireland a few years back, and I actually questions from the audience has mentioned that the Indian regulator has mandated a blockchain solution. I'm not exactly sure in what area. Is that something you're aware of, Prasanna?
Yes, Steve. I think the Indian government of India wanted to bring this blockchain ecosystem to make sure that, especially to protect customers from, I mean, as of now, it has been mainly targeted for A2P messaging. You know, being an enterprise, if I want to communicate to the customers or to the end users, my sender ID, I need it to be registered with the government agency in the blockchain, so that every message that gets originated is being validated and being making sure that the message is getting originated from the proper legitimate originator, so that we can have that kind of confidence building among the users who is going to receiving such kind of messages. But I'm really not sure, you know, how extent that has been seen in terms of the voice fraud. But definitely this is something that the people are working for addressing the messaging fraud.
Okay, thank you. Could I just, we've got, I think, just short of 15 minutes left. So thinking about the whole fraud scenario, what are the up and coming frauds? So what's starting to worry us now that, you know, are starting to grow into the bigger frauds? And there was also one question that someone asked, any possibilities to disrupt fraudsters higher up the chain? I'm not 100% sure I understand what that means, but let's sort of tie that into the question of what's starting to worry you now. And perhaps Katia, from the i3 forums perspective, what are you starting to think about and work on that we'll see results from in the coming year or so?
So what we have been seeing is a rise in SMS fraud that is extremely similar. I'm not talking about the traditional A2P SMS bypass. I'm rather talking about the bad guys working out the same kind of fraud schemes that we have seen on voice. Now they are migrating to SMS. IRSF, we see it now on SMS. Well, I mean, and it's pretty recent. I would say 1.5 years, couple of years, that it's becoming to a scale that it becomes kind of an issue. Bypass through malware mobile apps that are in some cases activated by the end users. That, I mean, they really get I think it's becoming a little bit more difficult to them or to some of them to perpetrate the same fraud schemes on voice traffic, and they are now moving to SMS that has been less regarded by the operators. There's been less controls, probably also because there was less money at stake, and that there were less complaints. But I think now it's getting to another kind of level. And I mean, going back to how we can go up the chain and see the fraudsters, I think there's one initiative in US that I like quite a lot, and it's this traceback process that has been implemented, or I mean, under the umbrella of FCC by USTA. I think it's a good, very good solution to go up the chain and find who is the sender of the malicious traffic. It can be SMS, it can be voice, it can be anything actually. But for that to happen outside of US that have that has a very specific legislation that allows, or regulation that allows for this. We need regulators to get involved. We need regulators to allow us to disclose this kind of information in a well-framed process. But I think it's a very easy, I'm quoting, process where you can easily detect who the bad guys are at some point.
Okay, before we just have, I'm sure both Prasanna and Robert also have a view on that question, but we did have one anonymous question that came in, which says, what is holding you back from being open about who the bad actors are? So either Prasanna or Robert, do you want to perhaps take that one?
Yeah, I think if I'm not wrong, I think Katia mentioned earlier, the old NDAs, the non-disclosure agreement that we have with our customers, which will, definitely we know that maybe the customer, the source of the traffic may not be the direct to our network, maybe in the behind, but definitely we know that traffic is getting originated from one particular operator or one particular source. And yeah, to answer your question, why can't we share that information about that particular source? Obviously, I think due to so many reasons like non-disclosure agreements while we onboard any customers to our networks, I think there are certain agreements that are holding us not to expose such kind of information, the origin, whoever is originating such kind of traffic is definitely, I think maybe once we go beyond the regulatory or once we go beyond the standard agreement that we have with our customers, maybe we should be able to share. Once we have started sharing such kind of information, then probably it will be more difficult for the perpetrators or fraudsters to be able to artificially inflate such kind of traffic.
Robert?
Just to add up, or also to add something to Katia's point, going in this direction is if you want to stop fraud, you have to stop the payment. And it's difficult to enclose all the data of your business partners. This is definitely something which is challenging from a contractual point of view. But what we also see and what we would need is more support from the law enforcement, so that we are having someone independent playing a little bit of kind of referee to allow us to exchange this or to follow up on this, even maybe not sharing it, but really to get involved. It's really difficult to get police or in any country involved to stop voice fraud. The source of the attack is mainly out of the jurisdiction of your own country somewhere, and we need really international cooperation to challenge this in a better way. The police, it seems, is not really prepared from the resource perspective, but also from the knowledge to fight this effectively in each country, and definitely not in the international environment.
I was just thinking about we had those two questions, the one about the higher up the chain and the bad actors. There are two parts to a fraud. Obviously, someone's got to originate the call, and so various people break into PBXs and hack phones and all the rest of it. But those calls are going to expensive numbers in sometimes small countries, small operators have these expensive numbers. Are there really valid uses for those numbers, or are those numbers purely used to enable frauds to take place? So does anyone ever call these numbers from within the country for a valid?
So it's very, very clear. So they're short stopped, or there's just an IVR playing music or whatever. So when we do the test calls, we hear a lot of things, and they're getting more advanced already. In the past, it was just easy to identify. You get an announcement or a game or whatever. Now they are really playing recorded conversations. So it's really difficult to identify this easily. But to challenge the up the chain is just, I would like to mention one initiative where I'm involved as well, is from the GLF, from the Carrier Blockchain Association Network, where you have, let's say, an automated dispute process for fraud, where you can exchange the details of the fraud within a blockchain environment within seconds, which is now taking months. So there's ideas to use new technologies to really tackle this and improve and speed up the entire process. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, I'd like to chip in on the question about why we can't talk about bad actors. And I'm going to be a troublemaker here by not saying things that other people won't say, because really what it comes down to is politics. It comes down to the politics of whether governments err on the side of reining in large telcos to ensure that they don't behave in monopolistic fashion, putting in place rules that designed to prevent against them abusing their position relative to smaller providers, and where you put how much you emphasize that so that they can't start to cast aspersions, shall we say, or point fingers without there really being a lot behind them. But what we're seeing actually, I think, very interestingly this year in the United States of America is an acceleration of a trend away from that towards it's actually more important to protect the customer, the end user, than to protect these businesses from being falsely accused. So coronavirus has sped up a transition that was already beginning in the United States of America, where instead of being very careful not to prejudice the opportunities for a smaller business to compete in the marketplace, the focus is much more on initiatives like the Traceback initiative, where it's identify who's responsible for this, where is it coming from, let's take really rapid action, let's take them out the ecosystem as quickly as possible. We've seen the really dramatic change in mindset there, from people being wary about talking about where traffic is coming from to, if you don't sort out this traffic within 48 hours, we're disconnecting you completely from the US ecosystem. And so there is a political element to this, which can't be solved by people like us having this conversation. It can be solved, though, by politicians stepping back and saying, where's my priorities overall? And it's unfortunate, but the sheer volume of robocalls in the USA has shifted the balance in the mind of politicians away from that understandable free market perspective in terms of you don't want to give the biggest parties too much power, towards we've got too many bad actors in the ecosystem, and the only way to weed them out is taking much more aggressive action against them. So what will be interesting is the extent to which that trend, that political trend in the USA, can then leverage behavior elsewhere in the world, so that telcos change their behavior because they don't want to lose the ability to connect to US consumers, and the extent to which other governments start saying, well, this seems to be popular with voters in the USA, maybe this will be popular with our voters too. So I think that's the bigger picture that we should always keep reflecting upon, is that this is ultimately about end consumers understanding the issues and then being able to speak to people who can respond to the issues. And there is a political element to that as well.
Just, we can get the transparency internally. So what we have achieved is really, we are sharing the information about the fraudulent traffic internally, and we are removing the bad players within our network. We might not be able to share it with the wider community, but internally we are doing this cleanup. And I think, Katia, you're doing quite similar things. We are trying to identify the black sheep internally, and then if everybody removes them, even if we can't share them, then we will also achieve some benefit.
But I kind of agree with Eric that, I mean, again, we're all doing a lot of efforts, but we still see massive amounts of fraud. And I think we need to find something else, a spark here and there that bind all these initiatives together. And as I said in the beginning, I truly believe that if we want to make something significant, we need to do it together. Now, is it going to be this binding mechanism? Is it going to be STIR-like thing? I mean, a technology? Is it going to be a process traceback-like? Is it going to be a regulatory political push because there's a lot of pressure from the population and that it becomes unmanageable otherwise? I don't know. But I truly think that there has to be something else to be done. Otherwise, I mean, we'll be doing the best that we can on our side, but I mean, at some point we need to go one step further, I believe. And that is why I was mentioning this traceback seems to be like the easiest initiative in the short term. I'm not saying it's the final solution, but it's, you know, one step more to bind in all the efforts that we're all doing together.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time. I think we've got a fair amount of work still to do in the next year or two, maybe the next 10 years, I'm not sure. So first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for their presentations and their discussions. I'd like to thank the audience as well, and hopefully you found it interesting. What I'd finally like to mention is that there's the final session of the day at this conference starts in 15 minutes time and is on Spotlight on the Americas. So if you would like to join in 15 minutes time, that will be the final session of the day. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.